This is episode 397 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Ros Barber, author of the Marlowe Papers. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend, Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Each November, families across the United States gather around tables filled with food to celebrate Thanksgiving, a holiday rooted in the story of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag coming together to have a harvest feast in 1621. Traditionally, we tell this story as one of survival and gratitude, with the Pilgrims giving thanks to God for their first successful harvest and the Wampanoag joining them in peace and fellowship. But when we look a little closer at that moment in history, we discover that the idea of giving thanks wasn't unique to the English settlers. For the Wampanoag people, holding a seasonal festival of gratitude was already an established tradition, celebrating the bounty of the land, honoring relationships, and expressing thanks for what had been provided. In many ways, what happened in 1621 wasn't just a colonial Thanksgiving. It was a joining of cultures grounded in this shared spirit of gratitude. Today, we're joined by Malissa Costa, herself a Mashpee Wampanoag, and guest experience manager of the historic Patuxet home site at Plimoth Patuxet, as well as Richard Pickering, who is deputy executive director and senior historian at Plimoth Patuxet Museums. Together, they bring both native and English perspectives to this moment in history, drawing on their expertise in Wampanoag life waves and early colonial experience. In our conversation, we explore Wampanoag life in the early 17th century, what their clothing styles reflected about their environment and values, the cultural importance of deerskin, and how the traditions of gift-giving, shared meals, and material exchange shaped early interactions with the English settlers. We'll also talk about brain tanning, the practice of giving deer as diplomatic gifts, and how these traditions help us better understand the shared moment of the 1621 harvest feast. Whether you're breaking bread, preparing a turkey, or simply enjoying the coziness of the season today, I invite you to join us right now as we reflect on this early moment of cultural connection when two communities, each with their own traditions of Thanksgiving, came together in peace and shared a meal. Before we dive into our conversation today, I do want to remind you that there is visual history extras related to today's conversation available for members of That Shakespeare Life. This week's extras include woodcuts of 17th century native fashion, primary documents, museum artifacts, and period paintings. You can access all of these things while you listen to the show by going to CassidyCash.com/episode 397 and clicking Access the Extras. You can scroll through all these bonuses while you listen. Again, that URL is CassidyCash.com/EP397. And now, let's dive into the history. Hello, Melissa and Richard. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Cassidy.
Hello, Cassidy. Thanks for having us.
So excited to have you both here today and to dive into this part of Shakespeare's history here. I want to begin with exploring what was typical for the Wampanoag people. What kind of clothing were typical for this time period when the Pilgrims were arriving, and how did these styles reflect the environment and culture of the Wampanoag at this time period?
That's a really good question. So for the Wampanoag, we wore what the seasons gave us. We're shaped by our environment, and we wear a lot of buckskin or deerskin, which is worn year-round. And you're going to see a lot of the women wearing wraparound skirts, off-the-shoulder garments, and also moccasins. And for the men, same thing. They're going to have either a breechcloth, which is open on the sides, or a wraparound skirt made of deerskin, along with a off-the-shoulder top. But we also shape it by the environment in the seasons, which means in the springtime, you're going to see us wearing a lot of woven garments out of plant fibers. So that could be reeds or grass, or even just topless. Honestly, in the 17th century, you're going to see a lot of women wearing lots and lots of beads on the top as well.
The Wampanoag use leather very different from the English. What were some of the key differences in how each group produced and used leather? And how might those differences have shaped the early impressions of one another? Because you're talking about skins being used for clothing. I mean, the English would have an understanding of that, but undoubtedly the application for both was different.
I think the big difference between the Wampanoag's clothing and the English would be the process of the leather, where the Wampanoag people are using a brand tan process and the English are using a different process, which involves a lot of oak and chestnut tannins. But for Wampanoag people, you're going to brain tan, which means taking the brain of the animal and processing it into the skin itself.
And for the English, the leather is being used both for highly decorative gloves and for work gloves. And leather being resistant to fire, you find that in many of the different crafts where fire is essential for the protection of the workers, they're wearing leather garments.
Now, we've mentioned deerskin and buckskin as being very, very common for clothing for the Wampanoag, but tell us about the role of these materials in other parts of daily life. I mean, you've mentioned living very seasonally, but were they also useful in diplomacy?
I would say so. You're going to see deer being used during ceremonies, weddings, funerals, and it just has a long history. It's more than just the skin itself, it's who processed it. How long did it take? What was it processed for? We are seasonal when it comes to our diet. So you're going to see a lot of this deer being ate in the winter or fall. So it's the women that are the ones who process this. So what stories does it tell? What quality is that tan leather in?
And for the English, being in New England, their relationship with deer and venison in particular changes because the people that come over on Mayflower and the subsequent vessels, they're the middling sort. They don't have the private deer parks where they can go hunting. And so back in England, you would find that at every major life passage, you would want venison that might be presented by someone of slightly higher status. That becomes common here. And for the first Thanksgiving, when Massasoit presents to the English $5 of venison, that in English eyes is a mark of gentility. So what we see in these cultural encounters between Wampanoag people and the English is they're often doing things that they have no idea how it's falling in the mind or heart of the other.
I want to touch back on the whole brain tanning difference between the leather as an example of what you're talking about, where we're using the same materials, but there's an unfamiliarity about the impact of that in each instance, because this was a completely different way of processing leather than, I mean, obviously the English had leather, but they did it differently than the way of the Wampanoag. So explain for us how this process works exactly and why was it a valuable skill? And then also give us the English perspective here. Were they impressed with this method, or how did they respond to learning about this new way of doing things?
This is a question I get a lot from a lot of the visitors, and they're like, how do you brain tan? So it's butchering and fleshing, soaking and cleaning, make your brain solution, work and stretch, smoke it, and then your final is softening. So that's the quick version of how to process.
That's the 3-second leather processing right there.
that is it, if you're ever in a bind. But this is a job that the women usually did. So the men would go out hunting these big game animals, and then the women would process it by breaking it down into smaller pieces, scraping the hide. You're going to have your frame set up year round, really, and easy access for people to really get a hold of those skins, because you never know what you're hunting. Rabbit is one of those things where we hunt them year round because they're white meat. So you could process a rabbit. So you're going to have your frame up.
And I don't know of any English reaction to seeing brain tanning. And I suspect that's because the English interest in exchange with native peoples is not skin so much as fur that then can be sold back in England for the fashion industry. But regarding the production of leather, I do not know of any written English record as to what they thought of it.
I'd be interested to look and see if that method went back to England at some point. If anybody took it back and said, hey, here's another way of processing this or not. But that's an aside research project. I'm interested in the other technologies. Were there other shared ways of doing things that the Wampanoag might have shared with the English colonists early on? Or were there exchanges that we do know that could have shaped the English colonists' chances of survival in this environment?
Yeah, the first thing is the agricultural knowledge, right? So showing them how to plant the corn, beans, and squash, and what is corn, right? So introducing this Indian grain or Indian corn to them. And then Wampanoag people are planting in a mound as well. So that's something that's going to be introduced, food gathering and preserving, the way we do it a little bit different than the English. Local ecology, just the environment, how does it work? When do we hunt things, and where to go to hunt these animals, or even to get the fish? And then our process of wood is totally different in the sense that we're going to use fire more so than an axe, which you're going to see a lot of the English, really going for. And then our trading and bartering systems, where we don't have that money here. So how do we, do things different? We're going to trade instead of using that money. And of course, wampum, everyone thinks about wampum being money, but for Wampanoag people, this quahog shell is all along the beach. So we wouldn't see it as money per se, but it is valuable in the sense that it takes a long time for the men to process that shell. It's a lot of skill that is involved in that.
Melissa and I have seen a lot of change in our understanding in the last 15 years because the museum partnered with the Fisk Center at UMass Boston. And the archaeological discoveries that have been made completely changed or affirmed what was in the written record. And for many of us, we were looking at the written record with a kind of skepticism about the way the English were writing regarding their relationship with Wampanoag people. And then the archaeology was showing us that they were living just feet away from one another, one on one side of Town Brook. Some after the wall was built around the English town, just a foot and a half away on the other side of that wall. And the archaeology also returned Wampanoag women to the story, because the traditional story many of your listeners may know is that Tisquantum or Squanto taught the English how to plant corn. And our new understanding is with the proximity to Wampanoag women, he isn't doing the instruction. Tisquantum is translating for the English what they are seeing from the Wampanoag women. And then it's suspected that during the course of the year, the English women and the Wampanoag women, even though they can't speak, they are teaching one another back and forth.
I had no idea this community was quite so tangible. In all of the depictions I think I've seen of this story, there's a travel involved. There's a sense of we're here and there's people over there, and you have to travel to interact. The idea that they're just feet away from one another, living literally together, totally changes a lot of the perspectives I think people have on this story.
And Massasoit Usamiquin sent a diplomat to live with the English. So he is a very intelligent leader, and a man who was my mentor and Melissa's mentor, Nana Pashmet, used to say he was a key figure at understanding realpolitik, and that we shouldn't turn this into a kind of innocent friendship. It's two sophisticated diplomatic communities who are looking at one another and thinking, this is what I can do for you, and this is what I can get from you. So it's not a classic friendship and friendly, but it's two communities reaching towards one another for survival after horrific deaths.
Absolutely a partnership between two communities that were intentional about what they were approaching. If you're enjoying the history you're learning about today and want to go one step further, consider joining Experience Shakespeare. Come inside where you can try out games, recipes, and crafts straight from the 16th century. Plus, you can explore Shakespeare's world through virtual tours, animated plays, and a full library of printable resources. Experience Shakespeare is a community of history lovers who, like you, want to go beyond just listening and truly live the history. Why just learn about Shakespeare's history when you can experience it? Join today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and click on Experience Shakespeare. And now, back to the show. One part of Wampanoag culture that stands out for me, I think, is the tradition of giving deer as a gift. You mentioned Massasoit showing up with these $5 to give people. Could you share more about that practice and that moment? Like, how do we know it was 5 deer, and why was this important? Obviously, it went well beyond, hey, you're hungry, here's some food. There was more to these sophisticated diplomatic communities. So tell us about this relationship.
Well, what you find is that there were some aboard Mayflower who had had experience of diplomatic ventures in Holland when they were young men before they escaped and formed a church in Holland. And so they are approaching Wampanoag people with that tradition of what they knew in Europe. So the first time that Usamiqua Massasoit comes to the English, they immediately respond as quickly as they can with those traditions that they knew back in England and back in Europe, and they treat him as a king. And so the honors that are given him, and as you say, the gifts, the honorifics, are marks of status. And the reason we know that those $5 of venison are presented is that there is a pamphlet printed in the spring of 1621 describing the Pilgrims' first year in New England. And luckily, these were people that kept tremendous records and details. So we know of that act of presenting the venison during the feast we now call the first Thanksgiving.
Deer is one of the essential foods for Wampanoag people. It's animals, so it would be a great gift to give somebody. It is more than just food. It can be used as clothing, bags, storage. So I could see why Wampanoag people were giving that to people like Governor Bradford on his wedding.
I want to ask about the Wampanoag traditions here, because we know from an English perspective how much the English had to be grateful for in this moment. Their lives really were indebted to the Wampanoag because it was such a new environment, and they had overcome so much. There had been so much death, and in their community, there was a reason to stop and give thanks. But the Wampanoag, as I understand it, already had an existing tradition of giving thanks, and particularly seasonal festivals that might have tied in with the time period of having this harvest feast. Can you tell us more about whether or not some of the coming together here was a reflection of those traditions?
Wampanoag people, we have 13 moons or 13 different celebrations month to month to mark what's going on around us. And yeah, that was a time where we're having our harvest moon, and we're going to be, eating and collecting a lot of our crop, and also starting to eat red meat. So it's like the perfect timing, really. But I always like to say, as Nani Pashment put it, if the English were just ignored, they would have died. They would have starved to death.
Melissa is absolutely right that without that exchange of agricultural technology in the first spring, so the English arrive with a year's worth of supply, but now they're in a place of unfamiliar grains, of a strange environment, and they need that knowledge of how these native grains are worked in order to survive for the second winter. So they're living into 1622 that is firmly based on what the Wampanoag were willing to share. But again, let's look at that idea of realpolitik, that for Massasoit Usamiquin, it's in his interest to have these people who are going to be his allies against another people survive. So it's not just, it is a natural kindness, but a natural kindness combined with an ever-shifting political world after the horrific plagues of 1616 to 1618. How are Wampanoag people going to survive in that changed world?
So, from your history here, you are both at Plimoth Patuxet, where part of what you do is bringing this history back to life in such a beautiful way, because not only do you have English reenactment going on, where you get to literally see what it would have been like for them, but the Wampanoag people bring their traditional dress and traditional perspectives into this environment as well. And so you get to step into this slice of history at Plimoth Patuxet. Definitely share with us about how we can experience that. But if we're new to this type of history and we haven't really looked at the relationship here in this way, what are some resources you can recommend for us to use to learn more? Where should we start if we're new to this part of history?
I think a great book is Linda Coombs's book, A Race to the Truth, Colonization in the Wampanoag Story. That's a really good place to start and get a lot of good research.
There was a wonderful book that came out at the time of the 400th anniversary of the first Thanksgiving in 2021, and it's called We Gather Together. And the writer from the New York Times did a beautiful job of encapsulating the history of the holiday, but also its cultural ramifications throughout history. Just a beautiful book, We Gather Together.
I will place links to these resources as well as the website for the Plimoth Patuxet Museum, which is, if you are around Plymouth, Massachusetts, or if you would just like an excuse to visit us here in the US, you can definitely go there and see that it's a great resource for this part of history. And we'll place links to all of these in the show notes for today's episode, so stay tuned for where to find those. Now, Melissa and Richard, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those. And I'll let you know that someone informed me on the original Desert Island Disc show where this comes from. They were also allowed guests to pick a luxury item. So if you're a big Desert Island Discs fan and you would feel like it's not the complete experience without your luxury item, feel free to add that as well.
Wow. That's a loaded question. Let's see.
It's the hardest question we ask guests by far. Yes.
I'm on a desert island.
Yes.
Oh, wow. I'm going water filter, and I'm going to go a classic one that's going to keep me entertained. Hatchet.
There you go. I can
be entertained. I'm going to be whimsical. I'm going to be thinking about ways to get out of there.
Yep, I can see that. That's a brilliant survivalist approach to your desert island. What about you, Richard?
As long as I get Shakespeare's complete works in a Bible, I'm going to take a double volume of the Iliad and the Odyssey with me. And my luxury item would probably be a firebox so I can keep reading after dark.
Ooh. Perfect. I think that would be well set up. If y'all ended up on your deserted island at the same time, I think you would have all your bases covered. You'd be able to cook with the firebox as well as to see after dark. And then you'd have your water filter, your entertainment, and then of course all the literature you could survive on for the rest of the time.
Exactly.
So very, very well.
Yeah, it would be good.
So what's next for you guys? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
I'm always working on weaving projects, so I'm excited about that. Working with local reeds called bulrush, which are something that we're bringing back, the skill of weaving with these bulrush reeds. There's a lot of women in my community that still weave with them, but not enough. We really want to expand that knowledge. So I'm excited about getting back at that.
And my teacher says, Richard, if you're going to write a book, you need to tell people, and that creates a deadline. So I'm working on a book on the first year of the English in the Wampanoag homeland and how you have communities of leaders who are reaching towards one another. And in a turbulent age, how can we take their techniques for community building and diplomacy and employ them today?
Looking into historical ways of diplomacy and employing them today sounds like soothing to my mind with all of the things that we have going on in the world. And I am so excited to hear about resurrecting and maintaining, preserving in the Wampanoag skill of weaving with bulrush. I can't wait to see what happens with both of these projects. And I want to thank you both, Malissa and Richard, for being here this week and taking us through this really exciting look at the first Thanksgiving through the eyes of the Wampanoag people and their impact on the lives of the English, quite literally. Thank you so much for being here to share this with us. And in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I am very thankful for you both.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Cassidy, and happy Thanksgiving to all of your listeners and to your family.
Thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. You can find more information about our guests, their recommended resources, and the Plimoth Patuxet Museum by visiting the show notes for today's episode. You'll find these at CassidyCash.com/episode 397. While you're there, if you'd like to go inside the history today with primary documents, artifacts, and other bonus history content related to the Wampanoag and the Thanksgiving Feast of 1621, then I invite you to become a member of That Shakespeare Life by clicking Access the Extras from our episode website today and unlock all the bonus history content related to today's show. Again, that URL is CassidyCash.com/EP397. As we step away from the 1621 harvest table, saying goodbye to this visit to the Wampanoag village and head off to celebrate Thanksgiving in our own homes, we give our gratitude to Malissa Costa and Richard Pickering, who so generously shared their knowledge of Wampanoag history, the 17th century English settlers, and the first Thanksgiving. Before we go, I want to send you a special thank you. I so appreciate you being here each week to listen to the show and learn about Shakespeare right along with me. I send additional gratitude to our members whose support keeps the microphones running and whose ideas, questions, and discoveries make this show so much richer. It's a true joy to explore the life of William Shakespeare together with you, and I am so grateful for this community that we share. You're the very best part of what we do here. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. Until next time, may your friendships be rooted in gratitude, your home filled with the warmth of shared harvests, and your Thanksgiving table be abundant with peace. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. From our table to yours, happy Thanksgiving! I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.